It was in the stillness of late autumn that I embarked on my journey to the southernmost reaches of England. My days in the city had grown tiresome, and I longed for solitude, for a retreat that would soothe the unease growing within my soul. The small Cornish cottage advertised on an inconspicuous website seemed ideal, a haven surrounded by rolling hills and the murmurs of the sea. Its photographs promised charm and simplicity, a tidy stone structure adorned with ivy, a garden bursting with wildflowers, and a cozy living room where an ancient rocking chair seemed to beckon. The host's message, however, contained an unusual note. "Please do not move the rocking chair in the living room." An odd request, but I dismissed it as a peculiar quirk, perhaps tied to sentimentality or superstition. My rational mind, steeped in modernity, thought little of it. I would soon learn the folly of such dismissiveness. The drive to the cottage was idyllic, though tinged with an unshakable sense of foreboding. Narrow, winding lanes hemmed by ancient hedgerows guided me to the property. Upon arrival, the cottage appeared as promised, picturesque and welcoming, its garden vibrant even under the slate-grey sky. The sea's salty breath reached me as I stood at the door, fumbling with the antique key. Inside, the air carried the scent of aged wood and lavender sachets. Everything seemed arranged with care, as though the house anticipated my presence. My attention, however, was drawn inexorably to the rocking chair. It stood in the corner of the living room, a relic of another age with its dark wood polished to a sombre sheen. It was positioned to face the window as though inviting one to gaze out at the sea. I ignored the peculiar unease that crept over me and set about unpacking. The first evening passed uneventfully. I dined by the warmth of the fire, sipped a glass of wine, and read until sleep beckoned. Yet even in the quiet I could not rid myself of the impression that the rocking chair, though motionless, was observing me. The second night began like the first, but unease shadowed my every action. As I prepared for bed, the silence of the cottage deepened unnaturally. No rustling of leaves, no distant waves, just a silence so profound that it seemed to press against my ears. Then came the sound. Creaking wood. A gentle, rhythmic noise emanated from the living room. I froze, the hair on my arms standing on end. Steeling myself, I reasoned that it must be the wind teasing the old structure. But as the minutes passed, the creaking grew louder, more deliberate, and unmistakably unnatural. The hour struck 3 when another sound joined the cacophony. Soft, deliberate footsteps echo. My breath caught. Someone or something was pacing in the living room. Gathering all the courage I could muster, I crept to the doorway, heart pounding like a war drum. The sight that greeted me shattered any pretense of reason. The rocking chair moved violently, rocking back and forth with a fury that defied explanation. Loud creaking intensifies, and standing beside it was a shadow, a figure cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct, yet unmistakably humanoid. Its head tilted, as though scrutinizing me with unseen eyes. My terror was paralyzing, my limbs frozen in place as a cold, oppressive force seemed to press against me. When the figure moved, just a slight shift forward, I found my voice in a scream that tore through the night. I stumbled backward, retreating to the bedroom where I locked the door and barricaded it with a chair. Sleep was impossible. I sat trembling until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. At first light, I fled the cottage, abandoning my belongings save for what I could carry. My departure was hurried, but the relief of the open road and distance from that cursed place was overwhelming. I later contacted the host, demanding an explanation for the horrors I had endured. Reluctantly, they revealed the cottage's dark history. The rocking chair had belonged to the previous owner, an elderly woman who had spent her final years confined to it. Her love for the chair bordered on obsession. She refused to part with it even in death. After her passing, attempts to remove the chair resulted in strange occurrences, unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and the oppressive presence of a shadowy figure. The family, desperate for peace, chose to leave the chair and warn guests against disturbing it. I reflect often on my time in that cottage, pondering the lesson it imparted. It is folly to dismiss warnings, however trivial they may seem, for in our arrogance we forget that the world is vast and unknowable, and not all shadows are cast by light. There are things that linger, memories, emotions, and spirits, bound to places and objects by forces beyond our comprehension, and to meddle with them is to invite the incomprehensible into our fragile realm of understanding. The attic entity in upstate New York. I had long sought seclusion, a sanctuary away from the oppressive clamor of the modern world, to dedicate myself to my craft. When I discovered a modest Airbnb deep in the heart of upstate New York, surrounded by dense forests and untouched by urban sprawl, it seemed the ideal retreat. The house was old but possessed a rustic charm, with its weathered beams and creaking floors speaking of a bygone era. The host, a kindly yet reticent man, made only one peculiar request during our brief correspondence. "Please do not enter the attic." I dismissed the warning as a mere formality. Perhaps it was filled with sentimental relics or unstable flooring. I assured myself it was of no consequence. In my hubris, I could not have foreseen the horrors that awaited. The drive through winding forest roads was serene, though shadows loomed heavy beneath the ancient trees. Upon arriving, I found the house to be a quintessential New England relic, its wooden facade weathered by decades, perhaps centuries, of harsh winters. The air was sharp and cold, laden with the scent of pine and decay. Inside, the house was as promised, simple yet warm. A large fireplace dominated the living room, its hearth inviting, and the furnishings, though aged, retained a homely comfort. Yet, as I moved through the house, an oppressive atmosphere clung to me. The attic door at the end of the upstairs hallway seemed to radiate an unspoken menace. I resolved to ignore it, burying my discomfort in work. The first 2 days passed in peaceful productivity. I wrote feverishly by the fire, inspired by the isolation and quiet. But as night fell on the 3rd day, the silence became suffocating, and the tranquility twisted into something far darker. It began with faint noises above me, faint thudding from overhead. Slow, deliberate pacing, as though someone, or something, was circling the attic. My rational mind clung to the idea of wildlife intruding upon the old structure. Yet the rhythm of the steps was too measured, too human. I messaged the host, who replied tersely, "There's no one else on the property. It's an old house. Noises are normal." By the 4th night, the disturbances escalated, dragging sound effects with distant whispers. Heavy objects scraped against the attic floorboards, interspersed with faint, unintelligible whispers that seemed to seep through the walls. Sleep eluded me, and curiosity mingled with dread. Against all reason, I decided to confront the source. The attic door resisted my touch, its hinges groaning as I forced it open. Loud, creaking door sound. A chill enveloped me, far colder than the winter air outside. The scent of mildew and something fouler assaulted my senses. As I ascended the narrow staircase, each step weighed heavier than the last, as though an unseen force sought to push me back. At the top, I was greeted by a grotesque tableau. In the center of the attic lay an ancient wooden trunk, its surface scarred and blackened. Around it, melted candles formed a sinister circle, their wax trails suggesting recent use. The air grew oppressive, pressing against my chest until breathing became a laborious effort. Then I saw her. A woman in a tattered white dress stood in the far corner, her back to me. Her hair hung in damp, matted strands, and her presence exuded a malice that chilled me to my core. Soft, eerie hum begins. I whispered a shaky greeting, as though words could bridge the chasm of dread between us. She remained unmoving, but then, without warning, the trunk slammed shut with a thunderous bang. Sharp slam echoes. The woman turned. Her face was a ghastly mockery of humanity, pale, sunken, her hollow eyes burning with hatred. Her mouth opened wide, unleashing a scream so inhuman that it seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. Shrill, blood-curdling scream. I fled, my descent a panicked blur. Grabbing only my keys, I stumbled into the night and drove away, leaving behind my belongings and my sanity. Days later, I demanded answers from the host, who hesitated before revealing the house's dark history. Decades earlier, a young woman had lived there with her husband, a man of cruel temperament. The attic had been her prison, a place of torment where she met her untimely end. Rumors whispered of rituals performed to bind her restless spirit, but whatever was done had only ensnared her in eternal anguish. Several guests before me had reported similar encounters, though none had dared confront her directly. The house, I was told, was a cursed place. The host, unable to rid himself of it, rented it out to unsuspecting travelers like me, hoping the spirit's wrath would remain contained so long as the attic was undisturbed. In my retreat to solitude, I learned a harrowing truth. Isolation can strip away the illusions that shield us from the unknown. In our arrogance, we assume the world's mysteries can be tamed or ignored, but some secrets demand reverence. The Whispering House in Savannah, in the heart of Savannah, Georgia, a city steeped in history and cloaked in shadows, my boyfriend and I found an Airbnb that promised a romantic getaway amidst its storied streets. The house was an imposing Victorian with high ceilings and vintage furniture that whispered tales of a bygone era. We were drawn to its charm, unaware of the malevolent secrets that lay within. We arrived at dusk, the sun casting long, eerie shadows as we approached the grand, creaking door. The house welcomed us with an unsettling silence, as if holding its breath. The first night passed uneventfully, with the old house settling into its nocturnal rhythms. But it was on the second night that the whispers began. At first, the sounds were faint, almost imperceptible, a soft, unintelligible murmuring that seemed to drift through the air. I dismissed it as the wind or perhaps the distant echoes of the bustling city. But as I moved through the house, the whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent when I entered the bedroom. Feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, I mentioned the whispers to my boyfriend. He laughed it off, attributing it to the house's age and our overactive imaginations. Undeterred, I decided to record the sounds on my phone. When I played it back, my blood ran cold. The whispers were clearer, and a voice emerged from the cacophony hissing, "Get out! Leave now!" Whispers intensify, followed by a sharp, "Leave now?" That night, sleep eluded me. Around 2 a.m., the lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced malevolently on the walls. Then we heard it, a loud crash from downstairs. We rushed to the dining room, hearts pounding, to find the old chandelier shattered on the floor. My boyfriend, pale and shaken, finally admitted he had felt a cold hand brush against his shoulder earlier, but had kept it from me to avoid causing alarm. We fled the house at first light, our romantic getaway cut abruptly short by the sinister forces that had awakened within the walls. As we later discovered, the house had a grim history. It had once been a funeral home, and the dining room, where the chandelier fell, had been used to prepare bodies for burial. The restless spirits of the deceased had lingered, their whispers a desperate plea to escape the house that had trapped them between life and death. The Victorian house, we learned, had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy family. Following a series of tragic deaths, it was converted into a funeral home. The house's dark history seeped into its very foundations, and the spirits of those who had passed through its doors never found peace. Their whispers were a warning, a cry for help that had gone unheard for decades. The lesson from our harrowing experience was clear. The past never truly remains buried. In places where history is soaked in sorrow and death, the echoes of the departed may linger, desperate for recognition and release. When exploring the charms of historical places, one must tread lightly, for the spirits of the past may still walk alongside the living, their whispers a testament to their enduring presence.